Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week,
Mr. President, thank you very, very much for sitting down with us.
President Ahmadinejad courting the global media in the United States as the government in Tehran clamps down on the media in Iran. iPhone tracking illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied territories. The American journalist who covers the Japanese mafia, we have his story.
Why in my life? Because I'm good at playing Yakuza politics.
And finally, sending out an SOS, a message in a bottle. The Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has just completed his annual media blitz of New York. There were the photo ops, the press conferences, the interviews, combined with his speech to the United Nations General Assembly and the global news media, offering, amongst other things, some conspiracy theories related to the 9/11 attacks. But there was one media story that Ahmadinejad did not want to talk about. That's the one in his own backyard. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, a third of all journalists imprisoned in the world are being held in Iran. And that number does not include citizen journalists, the number of Iranian bloggers behind bars. One of them, Hussein Derakhshan, has been held in Evin prison in Tehran for almost 2 years now, and he's just been sentenced to 20 more. Our starting point this week is in New York, but the story is actually in Tehran. While President Ahmadinejad lectures the global media and criticizes mainstream news outlets, the government that he represents suppresses the dissenting voices at home. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on that story.
Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad giving a much-anticipated speech.
Ahmadinejad cherishes these trips abroad, making speeches at the United Nations and being interviewed right across the American media.
Mr. President, thank you very, very much for sitting down with us.
Ahmadinejad is a perfect antagonist.
Why has everyone pounced on Ahmadinejad?
He looks like the enemy, he acts like the enemy, his rhetoric is very combative.
He accused the White House of orchestrating the September 11th attacks.
And that's why the media loves him.
Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
The media simply can't get enough of the Iranian president.
Well, he is here. He's only a few blocks away from our studio.
Every time Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has hit the global media capital of New York, American news outlets have seized the opportunity to put him on the record.
Quite frankly, sir, how could you say such an insane and nutty thing?
They're looking for what Western news outlets call the gotcha moment, a chance to put Iran's president on the spot. But what the media have failed to realize after 5 years of similar questions is that they're playing into this politician's hands.
They tend to repeat questions. They tend to keep asking him, is he prepared to have talks with the West, for instance?
Are you going to have a meeting with the United States?
He said a million times, especially since the sanctions, that he's quite keen to have talks. It's kind of a non-starter as a question. And they often fall in his trap when he responds a question with another question.
Every time he appears on CNN, PBS, other American networks, journalists ask him about nuclear issue, Holocaust denial, and asking Israel to be wiped off the map. I mean, those are legitimate issues, but he's been talking about those things for the past 5 years.
You have consistently denied the Holocaust happened. You have called it a lie.
To talk about Holocaust denial, for example, well, that's a question that Ahmadinejad, I'm sure, enjoys answering and has enjoyed answering for as long as he's been denying the Holocaust. It's something that gives him an excuse to not talk about the issues that he doesn't really want to talk about, such as human rights.
Human rights, such as freedom of expression. Iran has one of the world's worst records in press freedom. And since the contested elections of June 2009, the situation has become dire.
There is no media situation in Iran because there is no independent media. The media is completely and utterly official media.
You can write an article critical of President Ahmadinejad in Iran right now, as long as you don't cross certain red lines, criticizing the regime, criticizing the clergy, criticizing the supreme leader.
There are here and there some of the press that used to be quite independent, belonging to the opposition, opening up, closing 1 week later, 10 days later. They are not allowing any journalists to do anything. They can't cover any of the stories other than the official line.
They don't want journalism, they don't want blogging, they don't want people to have access to all internet sites. They filter a lot of internet sites, they jam satellite channels. So they try to keep people as uninformed as possible.
But Iranians have been working around repressive media laws since the 1950s. The country's mainstream media and internet landscape has been crippled by the government, and still there's an incredible number of independent Iranian blogs on the World Wide Web. Farsi, Iran's official language, is the second most popular language in the global blogosphere. And many say that one blogger, Iranian-Canadian Hossein Derakhshan, can take the credit for making blogging so accessible to Farsi speakers. In a country of thousands of bloggers, Derakhshan is known as the blog father.
When he lived in Iran a number of years ago, he came up with a system whereby Iranians could blog in Farsi. So the godfather of blogging is someone who's well known in Iran, at least in the internet-savvy younger generation.
But Hossein Derakhshan's blogging made him a walking target for the Iranian government. His blog posts from Canada were assertive and his politics unpredictable. He swung between being opposed to the Iranian regime to blogging in support of them. For a regime so sensitive about information and domestic public opinion, a blogger as mercurial as Derakhshan was a serious problem. Within 2 months of his return to Iran in 2008, he was arrested.
The thing is with blogging, when you blog, you write whatever you think right there, right then. And for him it was the same. When he was thinking in the beginning that he has to be critical about the system, he was. And later when he changed his mind, he was closer to President Ahmadinejad. And I think the main reason he's being targeted at this point is that they're trying to make an example out of him.
And Derakhshan's case certainly has become an example of Iran's lack of transparency, of the government's determination to silence opinion, and of what happens to Iranian bloggers who fall foul of the regime. Just last week, Derakhshan was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
It's very difficult to say what's behind Hossein Derakhshan's case. It's difficult to say what is behind anybody's case in Iran. The policy of the Iranian government is to make the lives of its citizens as insecure as possible and to be as unpredictable as possible in the international scene. So it's very difficult to say what is going on in regards to Hossein Derakhshan's case.
He is the victim of infighting inside Iran, because a lot of the people like him who kind of move between being pro the Islamic Republic and anti-Islamic Republic and don't quite know where they stand, they do fall into their own set up traps.
Well, it's all about his blogging because, all the charges are against what he wrote and what he said and what he did. They're basically targeting what he was writing and what he was saying as a blogger. Mr. Ahmadinejad keeps talking about freedom in Iran, and he keeps saying that Iran is a country with the most amount of freedom. But when you see a case like this, when somebody whose only charges are, his speeches and what he wrote, then you don't understand, what is the reality here.
Iranian President Ahmadinejad sparked.
And maybe the next time Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is in New York, the Western media can move beyond the same old questions
for denying the Holocaust
that provoke the same old answers and ask the president why he courts journalists in the United States while the government back home puts them behind bars.
Global Village Voices now on the media story in Iran.
It's very important to note that the Iranian regime is well aware of how powerful the international media is, and they will use it to their advantage. This is the regime's way of attempting to ensure that its message becomes widespread.
Iran has tried to send a message to bloggers within its own country that bloggers that rise to a certain level of prominence will be threatened, will be imprisoned, may be faced with exile or even death. Hossein Derakhshan is just the latest in a long string of bloggers in Iran that have been intimidated.
Time now for some quick hits from the world of media. Listening Post News Bites. They say in a political revolution, the first places the rebels target are police stations and broadcast outlets. In today's Russia, if you want to know which way the political winds are blowing, just turn on your television set. A few weeks back, we reported that Moscow's mayor, Yuri Luzhkov, was targeted by 4 different state-controlled news channels, all of which aired critical documentaries on him. Analysts at the time considered it a sign that Luzhkov had fallen out of favor with the Medvedev-Putin power access in the Kremlin. And that became official when President Medvedev fired Luzhkov by decree over what he called issues of trust while on a state visit in China. Presumably, politicians and power brokers all over Russia are staying tuned just in case the Russian media starts focusing on them. The issue of illegal Israeli settlements, some call them colonies, in the occupied territories remains a sticking point in the Middle East peace talks. iPhone has now set up an app for that. The Apple application called Facts on the Ground is a free download created by an organization called Americans for Peace Now that describes itself as a nonpartisan Zionist organization. The app displays maps of the territories. The settlements are marked as little blue houses, a bit like that Monopoly board game. Click on it once and you'll see the name of the settlement. Click again, you'll see when it was established, but it doesn't matter how many times you click on them, they will not disappear. A former U.S. intelligence officer has just released a book about the war in Afghanistan, and it sold out instantly to one buyer. CNN reports that the Pentagon reportedly bought the first 9,500 copies of Army officer Anthony Schaefer's Operation Dark Heart, and then destroyed them. The U.S. military said it did so because of national security concerns, without revealing what those concerns related to. A second version of the book, this one highly redacted, will be published. But if watered-down memoirs aren't your thing, you may want to keep an eye on WikiLeaks, the whistleblowing website. A persistent thorn in the Pentagon's side has tweeted that it has a copy of the original book. And since WikiLeaks does not specialize in book reviews, it's a pretty good bet that the contents will find their way online. Communications authorities in the United States are trying to play catch-up with the internet. The Obama administration is preparing legislation to be introduced to Congress next year that would require all online services to be technically capable of complying with wiretaps ordered by American courts. The rationale offered is that suspected criminals or terrorists are relying on the internet more and more for their communications and organization, and existing laws allowing for wiretaps are still limited to traditional technologies such as phone calls. If passed, this law would cover online communications tools such as Skype, Facebook, and Blackberries. Aspects of this bill are similar to what has been proposed in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where BlackBerry and its manufacturer, the Canadian company RIM Technologies, have been ordered to make their encrypted information accessible to the authorities there. We're back after the break with a look at Japan, the media, and the mafia. Welcome back. By being at the technological heart of the world's information revolution, Japan has done as much as any country to revolutionize the way that we all communicate. Yet much of the media there remains closed to foreigners, and the barriers are not just linguistic or cultural. It's the way that news is reported. Japan's system of press clubs, quiches as they are known, is designed to limit access to officials, be they in the government or in the security services. Only carefully vetted journalists need apply. And almost all of them are Japanese. That's what makes Jake Adelstein different. An American transplant in Japan, he became the first foreign journalist to be granted access to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Press Club, which reports on crime and punishment. 18 years of that kind of work transformed Adelstein into an expert on the seedy and highly dangerous world of the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. I sat down with Jake Adelstein to talk about his work. For foreign media organizations, Japan can be a tough nut to crack. Language, culture, and a notorious bureaucracy make getting anything other than a surface understanding of current affairs there challenging. Jake Adelstein is an American journalist who's lived in Japan for more than 20 years, so he's well positioned to be a cultural translator for Western news outlets looking for a good story from the Far East.
Do you get a shorter prison term for killing somebody with a samurai sword than you do with a firearm?
Absolutely the weapon of choice for the smart Yakuza.
Adelstein is best known for a story which landed him in hot water with one Yakuza figure in particular, crime boss Tadamasa Goto.
Even in disgrace, Tadamasa Goto still has a small army of loyal soldiers and a hideout on Jake Adelstein. The Yakuza say he will never be safe.
When we sat down with Adelstein in London, we started by talking about Japan's press club system. I've covered Canadian Parliament before, and there was a press club there.
Okay.
And reporters spent a lot of time at those press clubs, having a few drinks, working the sources.
Right.
Press clubs are very big in Japan, but I understand they're different than that model.
I spent most of my time in the police press clubs, and since those have to be staffed 24 hours a day, because crime never stops, it's also where you live, which means that there's, a bunk bed, a sofa, a refrigerator, always a lot of beer.
So these guys are in the building, so to speak, but are they getting insider access?
It's very hard to get a scoop in Japan because the government kind of likes to keep everybody in line. Japan has these strange laws that public officials can be fired or even imprisoned for releasing government secrets, for essentially talking to the press or talking to someone. So we have this informal understanding that after hours you can go drinking with the cops or the bureaucrats, and while you're drunk, they may tell you something that gives you enough to get a scoop on the competition. But of course, you can't take notes while this is happening, and you cannot quote them on the record. That's how Japanese journalism is done.
Overall, do you think Japanese media consumers are well served by mainstream media in Japan?
Yes, I think the Japanese media, because of the press club system, is often labeled as a bunch of sycophants that don't do any independent or investigative reporting. Actually, Japanese newspapers do an incredible amount of investigative reporting and are willing to devote long hours and manpower and money to do it. There are certain taboo subjects that they just don't have the guts to go after.
Like?
Yakuza connections to the entertainment world, corruption within the police department, corruption within the prosecutor's department, political corruption.
Those are pretty big issues to avoid.
Those are pretty big issues to avoid.
So for people who want to get reporting on subjects that the Japanese mainstream media consider to be taboo, where do they go for that stuff?
First of all, still the main outlet for real news is the weekly magazines. In Japan right now, there's a huge scandal about connections between the sumo world and the Yakuza. The weekly magazine Shukan Shincho broke that story, and the newspapers followed it up.
Why is it that the weeklies can go where the dailies fear to tread?
In the old days, and it's still true to some extent, if you were a newspaper reporter and you wrote a story that got squelched by the top management, you would go to a friend in the weekly magazine, and then you would either write the story or give them the information to write it up. I know that I certainly do it, and it still goes on. Also, in Japan, you can find books at the bookstore that are sort of mind-boggling. This book, which came out on the 28th of May, is written by a former crime boss named Godo Tadamasa, a person I don't particularly like. But what is amazing about this book is that he names the politicians that he worked for and was paid off by. And it was published, and it has been ignored by every newspaper. It has been ignored by the politicians. In any other country, there would be government hearings, there would be an outrage, there would be an outcry, but no one will touch it. It remains a book that is selling incredibly well, but the Japanese media doesn't want to address.
Adelstein is all too familiar with the reasons why most journalists shy away from critical reporting on the Yakuza.
I tried to write about it. They said, if you write about this, we'll erase you and your family. And I said, I don't think I'll write about it right now. As an investigative journalist, you can look out for yourself, but you can't necessarily look out for your loved ones or the people that are your sources or that you take care of.
Yeah, but I'm sure some viewers who are watching are saying, if the Yakuza are as nasty as they are, and you've reported the kind of things that you have, why are you still here alive to talk to us?
Why am I alive? Because I'm good at playing Yakuza politics. And you'll never catch me saying the Yakuza should be eradicated from Japan, that they're the most evil thing in the world. Most of them are tribal sociopaths. They do have a strange function of sort of keeping some level of street crime down in Japan, and it's always been that way. The Yakuza are publicly recognized entities in Japan. They have a public image to maintain. This is a Yakuza fan magazine. There are about 4 or 5 of them.
Is there like a hit parade?
Here are some of the top Yamaguchi dogs. This is the head of the Yamaguchi-gumi currently, Takayama Kiyoshi. Quite a fearsome fellow.
Okay, so now this is a fan magazine, but it's not published by the Yakuza, is it?
No, but the writers have to have semi-friendly relations with the Yakuza to report on it.
And they obviously tolerate it.
While they are slightly critical of the Yakuza, at least in this magazine, probably the most objective, at the same time they always talk about the roots of the Yakuza and that if it wasn't for the Yakuza, Japan would be overtaken by evil foreign criminals who would turn it into, a living hell.
Jake Adelstein, Thanks very much for talking to us, and take care out there.
I will.
More Global Village Voices now on Japan and the media.
We now have the Keisha Club system, which is a very closed system which lends itself enormously to manipulation of the news and to the exclusion of any viewpoints.
If I had to rate the Keisha Club system in Japan, I rate it a 5 out of 10. It's informative. When you work that closely with the PR department, you're going to be towing the politician's line. And as for why they don't report on the Yakuza, well, the Yakuza are heavily involved in the construction industry. Guess who else is? The politicians the media depends on for their stories.
And finally, the message in the bottle, one of the oldest forms of communications. In popular culture, it has become a symbol of isolation and despair, but in our web video of the week, American animator Kirsten Lepore has turned the proverbial bottled message into a method by which two star-crossed lovers from very different backgrounds can form a unique bond in spite of the ocean that lies between them. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.